Nicky, for heaven's sake.
Hello and welcome to Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast for all your Columbo needs. I'm Rich Nocella, and I'm here with my sister,
Adrienne Nocella.
And this episode we're going to talk about is Dagger of the Mind in 1972, starring Richard Basehart and Honor Blackman as honey-baked thespians Nicholas Frame and Lillian Stanhope, John Williams as Sir Roger Havisham, Bernard Fox as Detective Chief Superintendent Dirk, and Arthur Mallet as stagehand Fenwick and part-time chimney sweep. And umbrella thief. We're 17 minutes BC before Columbo, and the episode starts off on a rehearsal that is very close to opening night. I know it wasn't the dress rehearsal. It was enough for everybody to be in costume and for Nick to not even show up yet. He showed up very late with a bundle of flowers, very ham-fistedly flirting with the secretary in front of his wife and everybody, which really kind of never went anywhere. The whole episode, he was just kind of half flirting with her, but it just never, I don't know if it's just supposed to show him as a flirt. It just didn't go anywhere.
Maybe that's like the director's girlfriend or something, because she was really there for no reason other than to be like, hubba, hubba.
Oh, yeah,
like, she was just like if you were to draw a caricature of a secretary in the 1970s, she would be it. She was, so maybe that's why. But yeah, that went absolutely nowhere.
Honor Blackman, Lillian Stanhope. I'm going to try and use the name Lillian, the characters this time. I know I often default to the actor's name, but I'll try and use the character's name. So Lillian is in an argument with the director as they're trying to get things ready. I think they're trying to show how she was a big-time star, and so was Nikki, that they both kind of feel like they're just kind of above everything, and they're very temperamental artists. And the director really has his hands full trying to deal with them.
Right.
Not only do I need to see to play this part, the character is not a pauper, so that can go.
All right, we will change the crown in the third act. Make a note, Miss Studley.
And how about the heater in my dressing room? The whole thing's going to explode any moment.
I told the stage doorman, and he will fix it when he can. Now, Lily, at your entrance at the top of the Dagger scene...
My entrance? That scenery is covered in nails. If you want to see me disrobed and disemboweled, just carry on like this.
They are hammering as fast as they can. Now, can we please get back to the subject at hand, which in this...
And so after that, suddenly everybody's just kind of gone. It's late at night. Yeah. I guess it's supposed to show that mini dress rehearsal is over. And this was a logical issue I had, and maybe you can help me out with this one.
Okay.
It looked like they were wrapping things up, and then it was nighttime. Right. And then Sir Roger Havisham shows up. And it's important that nobody sees him come in. The theater is literally dark, like all the lights are off and everything.
Right.
He comes in, and it's raining pretty hard, as it often does in London. And he comes in through the back, sort of, walks through the seats, goes into Lillian's dressing room. And there we find out this rather absurd plot of Lillian and Nicholas conspiring together for Lillian to seduce Sir Roger, or attempt to seduce Sir Roger, into him opening his theater, which I guess because he's semi-retired was just never going to show a play again.
I guess.
And then, all right, so it's not just me, clearly.
No, I thought the same thing. I understand why. Well, I'll just let you finish.
Okay, so to reopen the theater, to put on this lavish production of Macbeth starring Lillian and Nicholas, then he is calling her out on it. He's figured it out. The inciting event of him figuring it out is he found out that her husband bought tickets to the rendezvous, the private rendezvous they was supposed to have. Yes. And that's how he knew that he was being had. I mean, how do you feel sympathy for him? What, he found out that the woman's husband he was trying to have an affair with was actually in on the affair to blackmail him or to goad him into making them stars?
This is my question, too, because you're right. They did specifically mention him reopening the theater just for this, which I can understand maybe putting on this production just for that. But like reopening a theater is a whole other deal as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, he must have known that she was you. All right, let me ask you. Maybe this is a bigger philosophical question.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Do old men with dirty minds, that's what she said he had,
Yes.
do old men with dirty minds who have a lot of money know that when they're dating basically a gold digger, that they're a gold digger? Like, isn't everyone aware of this transaction?
Well, I would say most are, and then some have such a colossal ego that comes with being able to make that kind of money in the first place.
Okay.
That they may actually believe that they're not using each other. They may actually believe that. I think most on some level do know.
Right.
I do think that. But I also think that the ego is a very fragile thing, and that if he really felt like, hey, I'm this hot stuff producer and this comparatively younger star is into me, and, let's just have this affair and I'll put her in the next play along with her husband.
I'll open back my theater up.
Yes.
Like, at what point, how many zeros are you adding onto your checkbook before you think, like, wait a second, maybe she's just not into my mustache and rain jacket. I don't know what he wears. His umbrella, I should say.
They specifically call it a tweed suit.
The tweed and his little hat with the feather in it. Maybe she's just not into it. I just found the whole thing, like, you're right. Like, why would that be the moment where he's like, wait, I've been had?
Yes.
If anything, it should be a relief. It's like, oh, cool, your husband knows. All right, great.
Yeah, you would think so. Or even, oh, gee, I'm going to close down this production, which is absolutely going to sell out every single night because, say what you want, they are good actors.
Stop it. I will say what I want. This is why I hate this episode, because it's just them shouting. The entire episode is them shouting, and I hate it. I hate this episode so much. It's painful for me. They just, even if I'm like trying to watch, I've tried to watch it at night. I'm like, okay, I'm going to just watch this at night. They're just shouting. It's jarring. Is this what Shakespeare's like on a play? Because I've only read it from high school. I've never seen a Shakespeare play in real life. Do they shout like this? It's horrendous.
Any play, everybody shouts. You just get used to it after the first few seconds, unless you're a sociopath. But
So this is what I have to say. We can talk all you want, and I know I'm sort of all over the place right now, but I loathe this episode just for their shouting. And the episode opens with her shouting at the director. He's like kind of loud back, but she's shouting at him. Then Nick comes in. He's shouting. He's not angry. Everyone's just talking very loudly. Then when they're getting ready in their respective dressing rooms, Nicholas is so loud in his warm-ups that even Lillian's like, oh, brother, this guy. And then Lord Havisham shows up. And then the episode, whatever, we get into the plot. And
it actually begins.
The episode is great. I had to get over myself and just be like, oh, this is actually a really, really good episode of Columbo. But I've always historically hated it because I would say the entire first full 45 minutes of this episode is them shouting.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think that the only reason why I didn't feel the same way, although I will admit this is a weak episode. I mean, okay. It's a decent episode. This falls well in the category of a not so great episode of Columbo, is still better than most other TV, but it's still not a great episode.
Okay.
But I guess because I loved the movie Sleuth when I was a kid, which was also from that time period where you had Michael Caine acting like a normal, rational person, and Laurence Olivier acting like a cartoon character. And so I think that these were supposed to be cartoon character-y theater people. And so they were basically like if John Lovitz acting, but for an hour and a half, This
is how I felt. This is really, truly how I felt.
Oh, and I understand.
Even when they weren't on when they actually showed clips of them performing Macbeth, they were subdued compared to how they were acting in the dressing room, in their car, talking to a butler. Like, they're shouting like Shakespearean lines to one another outside of the play. And in the play, okay, maybe they are good actors because in the play they like dialed it back.
Right.
All right. Anyway,
so they're
that's
good
my
actors,
tangent.
but aggravating people. You would not want to hang out with them.
100% no.
No, you might see their play and then say, "Hey, that was great," and leave. So they're having this confrontation now. So basically this, I guess, producer of plays, a theater owner, what even is he?
Lord Havisham is, I would say he's a producer. I would say he's a producer and he has his own theater. And so he was sort of seduced into coming out of retirement and financing this production of Macbeth, which they did describe as lavish. So I guess it was really a huge production of Macbeth.
Right.
And sort of maybe their comeback.
Yeah. Oh, no, that was definitely the motive of the couple. The acting couple, this was absolutely, and the reason why they hatched this plot of her seducing him is to fund this play that was going to be their comeback tour. The impression was definitely that they were famous when they were younger, and then this is their triumphant return to the stage. And we find out later that it was when they went ahead with the play. They had all these wonderful reviews in the papers. Right. So this was going to relaunch their career. And that's what this is all about.
So then Lord Havisham shows up and confronts Lillian about being disingenuous in their affair.
Right. Which he then goes out of his way to state, but they didn't actually have an affair. She snuck away together and then she had a headache, and that, he kind of threw that in her face too.
I know. And like, how long must that have been going on? She must be a good actress that she keeps on stalling him for him to reopen a theater, put on a production, cast everybody, get costumes, have a whole thing. And he's like, you had a headache, So I don't know how long she was like, talk about the long game. She must be a good actress.
Yeah.
But so he gets upset and then gets really like handsy.
No, he gets really physical right away.
He does.
Because he's kind of had it. And that's what I mean, the ego. Yeah. His ego was crushed and he was furious. And so when she kept then trying to fool him, even after the game was clearly up, then it's like, okay, now you're insulting my intelligence as well as bruising my ego. And he grabs her by the necklace, pushes her into a basket of some kind, ripping the pearls off her neck and flinging them to the floor so they scatter all over the floor.
I mean, he's got a flair for the drama himself.
You got to look, if you're going to be the detective in Dial M for Murder.
Is that who that is?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is. Okay, got it.
Which is funny because it keeps coming up every time we talk about Ray Milland, and then he shows up as a victim. So Nikki walks into the room and just still tries to play along. Like, hey, sorry you thought that all of her flirting and running away with you was her flirting and running away with you. She clearly sees you as a father figure mentor. At that point, that's when Sir Roger says, the old, not only am I shutting down this play, but you two will never work again.
Yes.
So, again, kind of really puts their back against the wall. So Nikki and Roger struggle, and as they're struggling, Lillian picks up a bottle of cold cream and flings it at the both of them.
Yes.
And we don't see it, but she's clearly brained Roger. He just collapses to the floor on top of the pearls, and then again, I almost see this as the whole thing is dramatic. Like this whole thing is kind of a play, and I don't know if that's what they were going for or not, but it's like they're kneeling beside his body and she's saying, is he dead?
Yes.
And, Nikki's saying, he's dead. And so it's, to me, it's like this whole thing was supposed to be a play, which is, I guess, why the shouting didn't bother me as much. But once you told me that before we watched this episode, I had to laugh because they did shout quite a bit more.
First of all, this guy's ego is fragile, Lord Havisham, and also his skull must be very fragile. I don't know how, like, a container of Pond's cold cream can kill you.
Well, two things. I guess it was glass, not the cheap plastic.
Okay.
And secondly, I mean, there was a very brief glimpse of him, and it did look like it got him right in the temple. So I'm imagining that it probably just caught him at just the wrong spot. And something else that we'll get into, she's a lot stronger than she looks. So we'll probably get a little bit.
didn't even think of that. Yeah, you're right. She is.
Because I think you know what I'm going to say.
Yes.
Okay. So they're now doing the dress rehearsal. They've hid his body in a trunk. And so she's on stage, then he's on stage. In this episode, I do like they have some clever little moment. And because overall the episode was a little weak, I do like those clever little moments. And so one was when they are on stage, the body's still in the trunk, and they're together, and he's starting to break down a little bit.
Yeah.
And she says, "You're coming unglued," and puts his mustache back on his lip.
Yeah.
So it was clever. I was like, his mustache was becoming unglued from the prop, but he was becoming a little mentally unglued already.
They have a bunch of that. Like when Nicholas burst into their dressing room, because I'm sure he heard the commotion between Lord Havisham and Lillian. I don't know if he knew Lord Havisham was there at that moment, but he heard a commotion which had him come into her dressing room. He's like, what did he say? He said, "She's in the wicker basket." And he's like, "That's a funny position." Or what did he say? Something like that.
Yeah. Ah, Roger, old boy. This is a pleasant surprise. Lily, what a curious position.
There's a lot of those in this episode, actually.
There are. There's a lot of cute little moments just completely drowned by filler. We now, that dress rehearsal's over, and as part of it, she finds Fenwick, the stagehand, trying to fix her heating that she'd complained about earlier in the episode. So Fenwick is banging away at the pipes, trying to fix them. He's almost insulted when she tells him fix them tomorrow, because he was going to move the crate, he was going to do all kinds of things, and they just wanted to get this body out of there.
Right.
So he was insulted, but then she says, "Well, thank you for caring," and then he gets all smiley. I mean, this guy's got, he's like an emotional toddler. He's just And then, of course, Nikki bribes him, by giving him some coins to grab a beer at the pub before they close. And, of course, Fenwick accidentally grabs Sir Roger's umbrella. So finally, they're dragging the body out to the car and sticking it. I mean, that steamer trunk is about 75% the size of that car. That is a tiny little luxury car.
I know. I was cracking up because in this episode, they have the steamer trunk on the car, which I think would be very obvious. Yes. Like you would notice it. And then later they have a bicycle strapped to the back of it. And I'm like, it's really funny. I'm like, that's how they cart things around. I don't even know what kind of model car that is. I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure. I meant to look it up. I know Sir Havisham has a Rolls Royce because that's what was seen being washed later on in the episode. But I don't know. I just know that it was obviously a luxury model, but very tiny two-seater.
Yeah.
Probably some kind of touring model or something. They then take Roger's body to his own house. They arrange things. So, and this is why I had to laugh, Nicholas goes upstairs to make it look like Roger was reading and then got distracted and then fell down the stairs, and that's how he died. They were going to make it look like that was the cause of death.
Right.
So he does things like he puts a book down, a first edition Alice in Wonderland, and he puts it face down on the table next to the chair where he would be, and then he comes down the stairs and we see Roger laid out at the foot of the stairs. And that's why I was laughing that she's stronger than she looks, because if he was upstairs arranging the room to look like it was reading, she single-handedly dragged Roger's body into the house and laid it at the foot of the stairs.
It's hilarious because also he's tremendous. He's like a huge guy.
Yeah.
He's like got to be over 6 feet tall, well over 6 feet tall.
Oh, easily. He's a very tall actor, yes.
And it's hilarious, the fact that he would even fit into that trunk anyway. And then she's dragging him through the rain, down the stairs, up the stairs, because the way that house is set up, you go downstairs to go back upstairs.
Yes.
So it's really, really funny. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, why is she doing this? Men. You know men. You
know those guys. He's all putting books face down, and women be dragging bodies like this, but men. But that's what's so funny, because I picture like her draping him over her shoulder, and
it's just so funny because I thought the same thing too. I'm like, why? But I think she was a Bond girl, wasn't she? So maybe she
was the first
Bond
girl.
Yeah, so maybe she is super strong. You don't know.
Yeah, you don't know exactly. So anyway, I got a a good laugh at that because it, of course, didn't occur to me the first few times I watched it. And then this time I watched it, I'm like, wait a minute. So that was very funny. And now we finally have 17 minutes in Columbo appearing, whether we'd set the stage for all of that.
Police Department, Lieutenant Columbo. Would you mind if I came in?
And so he's showing up at Heathrow Airport, a very famous airport in London.
Right.
And boy, was that a time filler of just him at the airport. I mean, it was kind of cute. I think the only thing I liked about it, basically, they're waiting for a VIP to show up at the airport, and that VIP is Columbo.
Yeah.
And so the only thing I like is that we'd now seen, a season and a half of him arresting people that would be the equivalent of somebody murdering Ted Turner's wife. We'll go with an actual person.
Okay.
All these high-profile cases, and even being told you're becoming a bit of a legend in the department. So again, another high-level kidnapping / orchid ring. And
yeah.
And so he's finally getting some due. So he's like a VIP going on, I don't know, a student exchange program going to London to
That's why I was laughing too. I'm like, wait, what is this? Is he in college? Is this a study abroad program? Like, why? If he's not speaking any place, like he's not a guest lecturer, he's just visiting. What'd they say? He's just visiting to see some of their police techniques that they do over there. Yeah.
Just to see some of our methods, and everybody's like, oh, I hope our methods rub off on you. And in the meantime, he solves everything. There's I guess a humorous bit at the airport where he's trying to find his luggage and he accidentally knocks another woman's luggage over and everything spills out. But it's just honestly super, super filler until the sergeant finally realizes who he is he's trying to meet.
Right.
And I did think it was funny that he said, hey, is this woman giving you any trouble?
That was funny. That was funny.
So again, a funny little moment. But
what was funny about that too was that the suitcase, because he picked up the wrong suitcase once before he knocked over the woman's suitcase, and it was another woman's suitcase, because Columbo's suitcase is like this bright 1970s floral heart case suitcase. So yeah, but I also laughed that that's a common suitcase in the 70s.
Yes, that there were at least two other people with that suitcase. So that bit of filler was followed by even more blatant filler of Columbo sightseeing, running out of a car. Taking pictures.
He's very much like a golden retriever in this episode, where he's just like running around like very eager, and that whole scene he was very excited, bumping into other tourists to take a picture. Yeah.
And I have to admit, I thought that was kind of cute, but it was just really like, oh wow, they're trying to justify going to England for this.
Right. It was cute though.
Yeah. So we finally meet Detective Chief Superintendent Dirk, which, again, I think it was probably intentional, but he had a similar raincoat to Columbo, a similar trench coat, but it was very neat and trim, and it was zippered instead of buttons. And so, and he also started to talk about his wife. So it's like, oh, are they going to do a little he's the English Columbo thing?
That's right, he did. Yes.
But then they never really went anywhere with that either, which was too bad, because I thought that would have been kind of cute if there wasn't a lot of detecting to be done, so Columbo really had to do the detecting, but it would have been fun if Dirk also did some, a little more significant detecting. But I guess that wasn't what they were going for. I thought they were going to. But they did have a stiff upper lip type joke when Dirk does say, oh, I'm throwing you off your schedule because my wife called and I have to run an errand. And the errand was that her uncle was dead.
I know. Yeah, that was funny. We just have to stop by. I have to drop off my card.
I just have to grab a gallon of milk and console my wife.
Yes. So that's how Columbo gets introduced to this, what no one thinks is a crime, I guess an accident.
Right.
Okay.
Which, interestingly enough, because I'm sure on paper this is another case where it's just, Sir Roger is found at the foot of the stairs, and you're but the stairs they go down one entire landing, turn, and go down another entire landing.
Mm-hmm.
So for him to be found at the bottom of that of the stairs,
mm-hmm.
you would have to think that he somehow fell in between the second landing and the bottom of the stairs. Because if he fell from the top of the stairs, he would have landed at the first landing. He wouldn't have gone all the way down.
Right.
I don't know if that's anything at all. It obviously wasn't anything in the episode.
Yeah, but then that means he would. I guess you could break your neck. Well, did they say he broke his neck? No, he has a knock on his forehead.
Yeah.
So that means that he would die on falling on like 6 stairs that are carpeted.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah,
they made a big deal about him falling down all those stairs, and meanwhile there were like maybe 8 tops. You know?
Right.
And it can happen. I mean, I'm not saying it can't.
You know how it can happen? Because the guy did die by getting hit in the head with a Pond's jar of cold cream. So sure, I think the stairs is a better bet.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. The old glass temple Havisham. So of course, Columbo has been invited by Dirk to look around the place, which is strange because if he's trying to learn other people's methods, you think he would shadow Dirk instead of, because Dirk said, I'm going to go question the servants. You feel free to look around, which I feel like was Dirk's way of trying to get Columbo out of his hair a little bit.
Yes, I think because when he meets Columbo at the airport. Well, when I guess not at the airport. Who was the constable that brought him?
It was Sergeant, but I forget his last name.
Okay, so when the sergeant brings Columbo, the sergeant kind of likes Columbo, and when the sergeant brings Columbo, he's getting reprimanded by Kirk about missing the guy, Dirk, and being late and the whole thing, and then he looks over and it's like, oh wait, that's the guy from LA. You know what I mean? Like this bumbling.
My word.
Yeah, he got in the wrong door when the car was open for him. Like he just doesn't know anything.
That was a cute moment. Yes, when the guy held the door for him, and because he's a simple man, he's not used to somebody holding a door for him, so he just walked around the other side.
Walked around the other side. So yeah, I do think he wanted to kind of get rid of him for a little bit.
Yeah. So he did that, and of course, he's looking around the room, and of course, we're now kind of getting to see a little bit of how Columbo takes in a scene. And this is kind of why I liked it and why I agree that he's a little like a golden retriever. He was looking all around, pulling butler pulls, looking in cabinets, pulling out flasks of alcohol, seeing and disapprovingly shaking his head at how the book was put face down on the table.
Right.
All these little things without saying anything. And then, of course, we see a glorious autographed headshot again.
Yes.
Of Honor Blackman.
I wanted to bring
Stanhope of Honor Blackman.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up 2 things because first I thought of you because this doorbell is not the American doorbell.
No, it's not the rich American doorbell.
It's not the rich American doorbell. It's the dignified. I guess where are they? The English countryside, because that's not London doorbell. And then, because Americans, I guess, are just bold and garish, we have an 8x10. Hers was like a 5x7 headshot. It was slightly smaller. It was a lot more tasteful.
Golden frame. Yes.
Yeah, it was in a golden frame, but it's very tasteful. It's not. Listen, it's not Tony who's just got in the Orchids one where he's just got a giant headshot of himself signing it to everyone all over town.
Right, or Brent just sticking it on a piano.
Yeah, so he does have like a smaller 5x7 headshot of Honor Blackman. Also signed, but at least that makes sense because she is an actress.
Yes, we finally have the headshot that makes sense. Of course, because Columbo pulled on the bell pull, we get a very British butler who shows up. And it was kind of cute that Columbo didn't realize he was a butler until halfway through their conversation.
I know, that was cute.
It was only when he said, well, my master. And we actually get to see at least some deduction. This may be the only deduction scene in the entire episode. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to list Columbo's deductions that he got in just this very brief moment in the room.
Okay.
He saw that the valuable book left on the desk was face down in a way that could damage the spine. And this was a very valuable book. It was a first edition Alice in Wonderland. So he sees all the other books protected by glass and it's like, okay, he would not have treated the book this way. He knew because Sir Roger was an older gentleman, he probably needed reading glasses, and he was correct. and that the glasses weren't anywhere around. They were tucked in his pocket, and he was fully dressed. All of these things seemed odd to him.
Yes.
And more importantly, if the glasses were in his pocket and he fell down a set of stairs, you would expect them to at least have, some part of them broken or chipped or cracked or something.
Right.
And it was only with that last one that even Dirk was like, oh, well, hold on a second. And he said, all right, let's go away. This is a terrible accident. Let's go. And then he tells the constable, hey, check out the spectacles in his pocket. So that's it. That's Columbo's deductions. And what it really does is it makes Chief Superintendent Dirk also realize that, hey, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye.
Right.
Especially because the very next scene is them holding a wake for Sir Roger in his theater on opening night.
That's a lot for the caterers, I think, to manage, because they're going to have to do the craft table, the craft services for the actors afterwards, and then they're hosting a funeral for a very important man earlier that day. Yeah. And they have him laid out on the stage, don't they?
Yes, that's what's so funny. They have a receiving line, and there's actually nobody to stand up by the coffin. There's like nobody's, I guess, missed him. I don't know. It's just his body on stage for a whole line of people to go up and pay their last respects to.
Yes. And
it was clearly set up by Nicholas Frame, because even reporters were asking, hey, why are we doing this, basically?
Right.
And he said, oh, no, that's...
who would let your lead actor? I guess he's got a niece, and he's got he has a niece, so why would she let his lead actor take over his wake?
I don't know. I have a feeling that it's one of those things where, again, they're supposed to be persuasive actors.
Okay.
And so if Nicholas said, oh, your uncle told me so many times that if he were to die, he should, he'd like to be in his theater one last time. You could see how, I don't know that she'd be too against it. It's still a receiving line. It's a wake. It's at the place he probably loved very much. So it probably didn't take too much.
Sure.
But you're right. This clearly came from him. This was not his living relative's wish here.
Right.
And I guess, again, it was just for publicity. Like, why?
It was for publicity, for sure, because even one of the reporters mentioned that.
Yeah, that's true. He did say, oh, it'll sell a lot. Not bad for selling tickets, huh? And through her tears, Lillian said swine.
Yes.
So now we have his body on the stage, Lillian crying hysterically, overactingly, but still crying hysterically.
But she doesn't start crying until she gets right in front of the casket. Yes. She walks up completely composed.
Yes.
And then she just collapses on top of the casket.
Yeah, it's clearly a performance. So again, this is where we have to really hope that Columbo is right when he assumes that she was responsible for his death in some way. Okay. Because if not, he's a monster. And so
you're right.
It really comes down to that again.
Yeah.
While she's crying hysterically and worrying about her makeup looking awful, kind of self-deprecating, woman in distress. And he's like, oh, I do have a camera, but now's not the time. But, can I get tickets for tonight's performance?
Yes.
He was our dearest friend. Sir Roger was mostly retired, until the last few months, when he persuaded us to do this lavish production. What he'd always wanted to do. Now he won't even be able to see it.
Terrible time to ask, but how could I get tickets? I'd love to see the show tonight.
Yes, that is true. It's a little not nice. Yeah, you're right.
It's a little much. It's a little much for him to ask somebody who, if he didn't know was a murderer, was clearly hysterically crying or trying badly to compose herself. He certainly could have asked Dirk for tickets. He could have easily arranged that. He didn't have to ask her. And then, bam, it's another montage of him in London.
Right. That's right.
It's on the London Bridge, posing, taking pictures,
It's a montage of him and Dirk, like, it looks like they're on a date.
Yeah, I was going to say that because one of them is like, they just got his hand around the other one. And,
Wait, what we didn't talk about though? Wait, I just have to mention this because I caught it. I thought it was so funny. At the wake, Columbo's accompanying Dirk there, I guess, as his guest also to a wake. right?
Yes.
So he's at the memorial service, and Dirk walks off stage with his wife. He kisses his wife goodbye, and then he pats her on the butt.
Yes. I absolutely saw that, and it was very cute. I think they just wanted us, the audience, to know that that was the wife that he was talking about, because otherwise it's like, it wouldn't have been very obvious,
Right.
I do think it's strange that he patted her on the butt. He could have kissed her on the lips, and that would have certainly signified it enough.
That's why I think it was probably ad-libbed. It was really funny.
Yes,
because like, who would write that in?
And he also had to lean over quite a bit because she walked away quickly, and then he leaned over and gave her a little pat on the butt. So it was very funny to me. Again, at the wake of her relative, he's patting her on the butt.
I know, and that was the thing too. I did want to say is that at one point we learned that it's her uncle, it's his wife's uncle twice removed, that he didn't see him that often, yet he knows an awful lot about this guy to not have seen him that often.
Yeah, and so I don't know if he knows a lot because he would have been a famous figure, and so he knows as much of him about because of that, and then his wife may be filling in some blanks. I don't know.
Right.
It's not made clear. So we're now back on their first date in the boat and on and everything. They did everything but had a little picnic lunch.
It really is really funny.
I mean, that's how it was shot. I know, obviously.
It is how it's shot. It is how it's shot. And then is that the same scene where Dirk is finally talking about police methods, and Columbo's nowhere near him. He's throwing out a bag of fish and chips that he just had for lunch.
It's not. That happens, believe it or not, a lot later in the episode. God. I know. No, it's just all constant London filler.
Okay.
But what's funny is you say that, but all it's really saying is, well, Sherlock Holmes. I mean, he's still talking about fictional detectives, so it's really not even talking about when Columbo said at the very, very beginning, he's like, Big Ben, the Jack the Ripper, happy to be in London. It's like, what? After this round of them tooling around London, they go to this very exclusive, fancy club.
Yes.
I guess the only thing is that we know from the wake scene that Superintendent Dirk is starting to realize that Columbo was right, that there's more to this than meets the eye, because the spectacles were not broken, and he ordered an autopsy. Right. And so now in this scene, in this very classy, exclusive club with all kinds of food, and Columbo hasn't eaten in a while because he was running around. They could have at least gotten some kind of snack on the way. But instead, they're at this exclusive club, and of course the coroner joins them and shows them autopsy pictures while he's trying to eat.
That was kind of funny.
Again, another cute little scene and another reminder that Columbo is often squeamish about things like that.
Yes.
Because he doesn't eat anything, of course. So
right.
A cute scene really doesn't tell us much about the autopsy, except for the fact that, yes, he did die from a head injury.
Well, we learned that the body was moved and that they all agree that it's definitely murder.
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously the important part, is that he had died. So it was the equivalent of the coroner from Death Lends a Hand, where he's like, yeah, look, this guy died someplace else.
He's like, a tiny aging actress dragged him someplace. No, I'm just kidding. He's like, that's spot on.
Yeah, that would be really funny. Yeah, his findings would be consistent with being stuffed in a trunk and driven 30 miles.
In a very small sports car.
Which probably would have tipped the car up on him. And so now that Lillian and Nicholas are aware that there is this autopsy, because she was overhearing Columbo talk to Dirk at the wake, they now have to come up with some other reason for why he's dead. So they go to the place to plant the idea that there was a very valuable book that Nicholas had lent to Sir Roger that he'd like to get back. And so when the butler is looking for it, he can't find it because that book wasn't around.
Right.
But that's just to plant the idea that this book that would have been worth several £1,000s is missing.
Right.
Even though it was never there in the first place. So again, it just seems like a lot. It just seems like a lot. Like, okay, I get it. They're trying to set this up. But boy, they go back and forth to that house like nobody's business.
They're really putting themselves there. They're talking to the butler a lot.
Yes.
And Nicholas does say, "Oh, you remember, don't you? I lent him this book. Like, why would you try to convince somebody that he didn't lend him a book because that didn't happen?" And so now the butler's like, yes, I'm polite. I do remember. Let me go help you look for it. But like that was a bad idea because that really planted a seed.
It was the first really big warning seed that the actors were involved for the butler. Like the butler was like, oh yeah, he was fully dressed. Oh yeah, he did have his glasses in his pocket. So he was starting to suspect along with Columbo and the detective, but he had no reason in the world to connect it at all with the actors. And that, I think you're right. I think that was him saying, oh, what's going on? Why are you trying to convince me that you loaned him this expensive book that I can't find any place in the house?
Right.
Oh, clearly there was a burglar who went in and stole one book.
Right. One book.
One extremely valuable book, leaving an Alice in Wonderland first edition right there.
And then also setting this scene like it was a fake. So now we're supposed to believe that it's a robbery where he took one book, left behind other valuable books, and then staged it to look like it was an accident.
Yeah, it was a very bad idea.
So this is the complete opposite of Single Framing, where like he's trashing a room for a fight that never happened to kind of stage it like a fight scene. This is like, this should have been a fight scene if he was robbing him. And he's just like, I'm going to take all this time to take one book and stage this one accident.
Make it look like you fell down the stairs instead of just, I hit you over the head and you died.
Right.
Let me grab a book and get the hell out of here. That would have been a little more... It would have been far-fetched, but a lot more reasonable than any of the others. So we're at opening night. Columbo steps on a couple of loose pearls on the floor. Yeah. We know what they're from. Lillian explains it away, just saying, oh, they were a prop, and my prop master or whatever, seamstress, made me another one.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this is kind of a nice little montage. You have everybody, of course, just gushing over them in various degrees of accurate British accents. And Columbo is kind of not tossing bombs, but he's asking questions that make it look a little suspicious. And it's nicely summed up by the fact that he points out that they have both told the same exact story, even when asked separately. And all of the details being the same, because he would keep saying, oh, that's what your wife said, but how about this? And then he talked to her and he'd say, well, that's exactly what your husband said. But so they did even plant it for us so that if we were paying attention, we'd realize that they were answering the same exact thing. So that was kind of neat.
Whatever it is, it sure must be most unusual. The reason I say that is because, when my wife and I try to remember what happened yesterday or the day before, well, we don't agree on anything. And you two, you not only agree, you use almost the exact same words to tell about it. Good night.
Good night.
That was a true Columbo bomb, the first one, really, of this episode.
Yes.
Defining a Columbo bomb, telling the killers outright, you guys goofed up. I'm on.
Yeah.
But then that was it. I mean, they get angry with Columbo, and then they have a fake little argument and makeup session in front of him, and he says, oh, that performance was wonderful. So a second bomb out the door.
That was
so
great.
He really, he gets him pretty good, to the point where even Lillian's like, oh, that performance, what did he mean? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that didn't go over her head.
No, she caught that right away.
Yeah.
And so afterwards, Nicky is met by Fenwick, who's holding his umbrella out, and that's when Nicky realizes at this late phase of the episode that he has the wrong umbrella, that Fenwick actually has Sir Roger's umbrella.
Right.
And so therefore, when, as part of the setting up of the scene, she returned the umbrella and his hat with a feather in it back into his closet, and they realized she returned the wrong umbrella to his house. Right,
because Fenwick previously already took the other umbrella, so she had no other option. It's not like she grabbed the wrong umbrella.
That's right. She grabbed the only umbrella in the room because he had already accidentally grabbed Sir Roger's instead of his own, because again, they just looked like identical classic British, black umbrellas with the curved handle, but the difference is that Roger's was engraved because it was a gift from somebody.
Right.
My point of view is, so what? just let things be. I guess at some point, it being an episode of Columbo would have found out that there was an engraved umbrella that Roger didn't have in his house.
Right.
But normally, probably they could have just simply let that go.
This whole episode, they should have let everything go.
Yeah, they almost tried to overdo it.
Yeah, he shouldn't have gone back and planted the idea of a robbery, because that just increased his interactions with the butler, who's already fairly suspicious, but would, like you said, would never connect those two to the murder. He's just now thinking maybe this is a murder.
Yeah. And
also with this, Fenwick I don't think he's sober enough ever in this episode to ever recognize that he's got the wrong umbrella. So
he clearly didn't, because he's just walking around with it. He had no idea. He's either drunk or using it to clean out a chimney. He would never have known he had that.
Right. So those are two instances where they could have just left well enough alone and kind of hoped for the best.
Yes, because they didn't have to explain it. In other words, if there wasn't an umbrella, what's it to them? If the museum says, hey, where's the special engraved umbrella? It's got nothing to do with them. They don't have it.
They don't have it. So there's nothing really. They're establishing all the ties to them. There were no ties to them. They're establishing the ties to them.
That's right. Since now they're obsessing over this umbrella, now Nikki shows up at the bar with Fenwick to try and steal the umbrella. Not even swap it. No. If he swapped it with a plain old umbrella, Fenwick never would have known the difference.
Right.
And then it would never have come to Columbo's attention, because we have this whole scene, again, quite a lot of filler at the bar, Fenwick getting drunk and drunker, throwing darts like an expert even when drunk, which is fair. That's something I believe completely that somebody can do, because that's, hey, he hangs out in bars and plays darts a lot. So that didn't even strike me as odd at all. And Nikki just steals the umbrella.
Yeah.
If he had replaced it, then no problem. Fenwick would have just walked out with the umbrella. But now it's pouring rain again.
Mm-hmm.
Fenwick's leaving without an umbrella. He's getting soaked. For the first time, Columbo's raincoat is getting wet with rain. And Columbo says, hey, let's go someplace dry and talk. I have some questions for you. And, I don't have an umbrella either. And that's when Fenwick says, yeah, could you believe it? Some young punk stole my umbrella.
Yeah.
And, by the way, Sir, Nicholas Frame was in there buying drinks for me all night.
Yes.
Oh, so you mean Nicholas Frame was buying you drinks, was in that pub, and now your umbrella's stolen?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, thank you for the only connection to the murder that ever existed.
Yes, that's true, though. Yes.
And so now, yes, Nicholas Frame has successfully stolen the umbrella, and so they have another elaborate scheme where they go to the house and wake up the butler, close to nighttime, to talk about, I just want to steal a different hat. And it's like, well, we can't.
Yeah, she's like, I just wanted to show up and take the hat, but I guess to Nicholas's credit, he's like, well, that's a little ghoulish, darling, because it is.
Yes. So the butler is saying, well, the police told me nothing can leave this house. Basically, this is a murder scene. You can't just show up and take a guy's hat.
Right.
And so they have this elaborate ruse where Nicholas is distracting the butler, and she sneaks in and she realizes that everything in that closet is now gone. The umbrellas, the hats, everything, and comes back out. And that's when the butler says, oh, yeah, before I was told that nothing can leave, every single possession of his is now at a wax museum.
Right.
So now they have to break into a wax museum to swap the umbrella.
This is a pretty zany one, yeah.
It's really crazy, because for the third time now they talked to the butler and asked him about an umbrella and a hat. So it's like, I think they're just going out of their way. They might as well really have just said, hey, we murdered your master, let's just deal with that like adults, because they just have done everything else.
Let me leave a trail of clues behind. Also, when they're leaving, Columbo's in a cab ride going towards there. Yes. In the world's most reckless fast cab ride. I didn't know that was a cab. I thought it was another police officer, but he says later it's a cabbie. So he's he's tearing down the road, almost gets into a car accident he knows that's their car.
Yes.
He's acting later. Before. Yeah, he has seen it before. So he's acting like later on it was like another small sports car, but I don't know. He's got to know that that's the car.
Right.
And so they're leaving. They almost get in a car accident. And then Columbo goes in and wakes up the butler again.
Yes, who's now in his nightshirt.
Yes.
And just basically says, hey, what about the umbrellas? I don't know. I forget what he asked him about.
No, he does. He asks about the umbrella. He shows up and asks about an umbrella.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought, but I was thinking to myself, it wasn't that dumb, was it? No, yes, it was.
It was, yeah.
He just showed up at that hour of the night to ask him about an umbrella.
Right.
They, of course, all, including the butler, go to the wax museum, into the basement where all the artifacts of Sir Havisham are kept. Columbo says, okay, let's take a look at that at the umbrella in his artifacts. Mm-hmm. And, of course, because they swapped it out, it is the correct umbrella. So I think, and that's why I think ultimately Columbo would have figured it out, because he would have searched the basement and found that the wrong umbrella was there, but there still would have been no connection to the actors with it.
There'd be no connection to the actors, and then he'd have to somehow have a conversation with someone to know that that his umbrella is engraved.
Yes.
He would have to know that somehow.
That's right, because the first time he found that out was when he was looking at the umbrella, and the butler says, yes, here's the engraving.
Yes.
The fabric's been replaced, and that's when Detective Dirk says from across the room, yes, I recognize that umbrella, even though you couldn't really have. It's just an umbrella.
And again, I'm like, how do you recognize your wife's second uncle, twice removed umbrella, who you never see, unless this is tabloid, all over the tabloids and everyone knows he's got an engraved umbrella? Then I get why they were panicking about it.
I could understand that, and I did have to laugh too, because there was at one point where they make a point of saying, oh, he's famous for the clothes he wears.
Yeah.
And he just wears a tweed suit and a hat. And it's not,
yeah, I mean, he's not like that party guest that was wearing a sequined turban. Did you see that guy?
I did, and that I could understand. He wasn't even like Roddy McDowell in Short Fuse, wearing puffed shirts and way too tight pants. It's just I'm willing to bet that in 1972 there were a lot of elderly gentlemen wearing tweed jackets with a hat.
I think they do that now.
Yeah. Exactly. So it was funny that they did that. I guess they had to say that as an excuse for why it was important for him to have his actual stuff at the museum instead of just them buying a tweed suit and slapping it on him.
Okay.
So now after that, I mean, Columbo even tries to say, hey, maybe this was switched. I feel a draft. Was this window open? It's just just kind of almost desperate at this point, even though we know he's right. And so we fast forward to the next morning, and the actors are in bed reading their reviews. I think they were at their most believable at that point as egoistic actors, is just reading these reviews and having a grand time and just laughing and just like they know, hey, this is it. We're back, baby. We're going to start our career again. And then the butler did it. He walks in, and he basically invites himself in with some croissants for breakfast. And essentially, we have yet another Columbo blackmailer that things don't go so well for, because he told them, look, not in so many words, but he said, all right, I know you guys killed my boss, so now you're my boss. I mean, I don't have a job. I'm an old man without a job. You killed my boss. I'm now going to be your butler, and you're going to pay me pretty good for it.
Right. Yeah, he blackmailed him for sure.
Yeah. By the way, I think that we should note that the actor who played the butler Tannen was considered a tax fugitive in England. So all of the scenes that are with the butler had to actually be shot in America, because that's where he was living at the time. And if he were to go back to England where they were shooting some of the other scenes, he could theoretically be arrested on the spot.
Well, no wonder he had to blackmail them. Yeah, he really did need money.
He had some back taxes to put out.
That's crazy. Also, they wanted this one actor so badly that they had to split production?
I guess so. I mean, most of the entire thing was shot in America. Just some of the stuff that,
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. So they weren't really bouncing back and forth. That was kind of neat.
That's hysterical.
Now we have the bicycle on the car scene. So they're tying a bicycle on the car, And I had an unfair criticism of this episode once. I said, gee, I hate in episodes where a person is calm and normal the entire time, and then when it's revealed that he's the killer, that he goes nuts.
Yeah.
He really was gradually, increasingly getting more and more unstable as the episode went on. And so I really have to give them credit for that. So that was an unfair critique of mine because really, as he's tying the bike, there are a couple of times that he quoted Macbeth to her and she was like, what?
Yeah, she kept on, she just screams his name every time he does anything like a little loony. And she's always like, Nikki, stop for everything. So, yeah.
So again, he's clearly does not. They're planning on killing the butler because he knows too much. He's blackmailing them. Whatever he was asking for was more than she was willing to pay in blackmail because he even said, gee, do we really have to do this? I mean, look, he's an old man. They probably could have just made him their butler until he died.
That's the question, too. Do you think he'd really be their butler or do you think he'd just want to get paid off?
I think he probably would have done both.
I think to make it around with that ashtray, cleaning up all the ashes and everything.
And he brought croissants. So, he could have just shown up and said, hey, pay me or I'll squeal. And instead, he's like, you have a maid, but that's not adequate for a high power couple like you. And, I think he would have been a butler for a little while to make it look good. And then he would have retired.
But you know what's funny about him is Tanner is the butler. Kirk said that, he's been with the family for years. He's been with the family for over 20 years. And I'm like, he must have started working for this family at like 55 then.
Yeah.
Because only 20 years. He should have been working for that family for 50 years.
He should have been working with them ever since he was a lad.
So he's like a late in life butler, but not really. Yeah. He's just a later to that household. I thought that was so funny because that guy's got to be in his 70s. Has to be.
Yes. No, the actor absolutely was. And he's played every butler and every British war soldier and every, if you can picture a British role, this man's played it. And I thought he actually was really excellent in the episode.
Oh, he was great. Yeah, I agree.
Lillian is setting Nikki to go ahead and kill Tanner, the butler. Right. And he really doesn't want to do it. He starts to, again, quote Macbeth. He's just kind of losing a little bit because he really doesn't want to do it.
No, because, the first one was an accident.
It's one of the very few episodes where it was an accident. I think the first one since Death Lends a Hand.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
For us to want to see them more punished other than just yelling all the time, they did have to have an intentional murder. And they've done this a couple of times in Columbo before and after this episode where you're like, I don't know, they didn't mean to do it, or gee, they had a really, really, really good motive, but then they had to incorporate something else to make us say, no, these people must be stopped.
And Tanner is such a likable, up until the blackmail, honestly, he's such a likable character.
Yeah. Yeah, he really is. He exudes British old school charm. Mm-hmm. And, even the blackmail, it's like, well, what is he supposed to do? He's in his 70s. He doesn't have a job. He clearly doesn't have a pension.
I think you see justice for your master who's employed you for 20 years. I think that's what you do.
That's right. Well, okay, fair enough. But I guess so.
I mean, self-preservation aside.
Yeah, self-preservation aside, but that's a pretty big thing to put aside. We gave Roddy McDowell a lot of credit because he's going to lose his job, his degree, his residence as an American.
That's my favorite. So. That's my favorite that he had to leave the country with the best time.
Nikki basically just shows up, and I didn't catch this earlier on, but Tanner the butler was told to bring a bunch of valuable books from the main house, and I'm going to presume that Nikki actually brought that book that they were talking about earlier to add to that bag because it was found as part of the possessions, but we already know that it didn't exist at the time, in the household. So we know that he kills Tanner. A few moments later, I guess the maid of the house who was giving the police officer a beer earlier on. Yeah. So she went to his cottage and saw him hanging there.
Yeah.
So it was actually kind of I would hope he knocked him out first. I mean, that's really an awful thing to hang somebody against him.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I did think of that. I'm like, how would you hang somebody against their will? So I did think he would have killed him first. They didn't show it.
So we are now at the Wax Museum as usual. There's a time crunch because Columbo's plane is going to leave very soon, and they have to get him to the airport. Like you could, obviously, if you can get a plane every half hour going to Acapulco, I don't see why you could just get another flight, home. But They had to give it that little element of a time crunch. So the actors show up, they sign autographs, which are about to become very valuable in a few moments. And they enter the museum. And of course, the curator reveals them in their Macbeth outfits. They reveal Sir Roger in his signature tweed with rainbow and feathered hat outfit.
Right. Yeah, he's definitely not like Elton John or anything, so there's really no signature sort of. It's just a guy in a suit.
Just a guy in a tweed suit. Just like, I think half the people in the room were wearing what he was wearing.
Yeah.
And so this is when Columbo really kind of goes into his final aha moment, which is he himself has an umbrella, and he just demonstrates how when you are in the rain and you come in out of the rain, you close the umbrella, give it a little shake, but you don't tie it up, and clip it closed because you want to let it dry. And he says that must have been what happened with Sir Roger, because his car had watermarks on it, and therefore he was actually visiting you too.
In London.
In the rain, in London, when he was supposed to be at his house. And nobody's kind of believing it. Everybody's kind of just humoring him. And then he says, by the way, remember these pearls that I stepped on? Well, I think that you had a fight with him. The pearl necklace broke. And maybe possibly some pearls landed in the open umbrella.
Right.
Now, just absurd. They say, okay. And they take the umbrella, and the curator opens it slowly, and a pearl falls out.
Right.
At that point, that was enough for Nicky to completely lose it the rest of the way. He starts doing the Macbeth soliloquy.
Yes.
And he can't be hey Nicky'd out of it by Lillian. This time he's gone.
Right, yeah, he's completely gone.
She correctly said he put that in there, Nicky.
Yeah, she's right.
She's like, he put that in there. And the curator said, nobody touched the umbrella. I'll testify to that.
Right.
And please don't be hard on him. I mean, it's sad because she realized the hand that she had in making him lose it as well.
I mean, isn't that like the plot of Macbeth?
It basically is.
Right. Okay.
So I didn't want to go too far into it, but yes, that's the idea. Is Lady Macbeth convinces him to commit a murder of a trusted friend that he really didn't want.
Right.
And she goes crazy and kills herself, and then he dies in some other Shakespearean ironic twist. But basically, yes, it's that she was the impetus for him committing a murder that he did not want to do, and now here we are.
Yeah.
So the police take them away, and now we have Dirk saying, gee, that was a bit lucky.
Bit of luck, eh? How did you know that bead was in there?
Oh, just the odds.
The odds were very poor, and you know it. Come now, you can do better than that. Off the record, eh?
Well, Mr. Dirk, when you were maybe in the 3rd or 4th grade and there was a pretty red-headed girl in the front row and you couldn't get her attention, just a little trick I learned. Excuse me. Throat. Amazing likeness.
By Jove.
And so Columbo then pulls out another pearl, makes a little coughing sound for distraction, and then flicks the pearl into the goblet that the Macbeth statue was holding, basically telling the audience that, yes, I flung a pearl into the umbrella that forced them to confess.
Right.
Basically end of episode, right?
Potato in the tailpipe all over again.
Yes, but worse. And I'll tell you.
Okay.
Because Potato in the Tailpipe, you had the luxury of wondering, did he really do it, or is this another Columbo tale? Now that's been stripped away. We as an audience were told, yeah, okay, he planted evidence in front of our eyes to get people to confess to a crime. There's no mystery there.
Yeah, there's no mystery there because that's, I guess, what we'll talk about in our little segment, but yeah, no, he just demonstrated how he did it.
Yeah, he shouldn't have demonstrated it. If we wanted to really make it potato in the tailpipe, he should have said, well, I used to be a marble champion,
Right.
And not actually show us him flinging a pearl into an even smaller target than an umbrella. Like they're showing that he's basically a sniper with that.
No, it's so stupid.
Yeah, let's just start going into it, because the episode kind of petered off. That was the other thing. It led up to this gotcha moment that didn't have anything to do with his logic, deduction, or reasoning.
No.
He just basically made up, hey, maybe a pearl fell in there. Hey, there's a pearl in there.
Yeah. So he coerced a confession. I don't know if that's really coercion of a confession.
It's not coercion, but he did fool them into one.
And I think that is legal, actually. I'm pretty sure that is legal.
Yeah, because you're allowed to flat out lie. So you certainly
because they're not presenting the pearl. It wouldn't be like they present the pearl as evidence that they committed the crime. The confession is the acknowledgement of the commission of the crime.
So I would say let's start our segments then, so we could talk more about it.
Okay.
So the first of our segments are, when did Columbo know?
How'd you know?
I suspected you 10 minutes after I met you.
All right. So tough one, because he knew he somehow, okay. There's two ways to answer this.
Yeah.
If you want to ask me, and we don't usually do this, when did Columbo know that Sir Richard was murdered? Was with the spine being bent in the first edition of Alice in Wonderland, and all those things he sort of figured out while he was alone in his, I don't know if that was a study or like a reading parlor or something, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I think that's when he knew that he was murdered. But that's not really what we do. We really do, when did Columbo know that the killers were in fact the killers?
Yes.
And I would have to say at the memorial service, but I'm not quite sure why he thought that at the memorial service.
Yeah, I don't know. Now, he was behind her on the receiving line at the wake. So I don't know if they didn't show us, the audience, him seeing that, but I don't know if he saw what you saw, which was that she was fine and composed and then cried and flung herself on the coffin, and that made him suspicious.
Right.
But I gotta say, I think the only time that I could feel comfortable saying he knew was at the after party of opening night, when they were telling identical stories.
Okay, yes.
And doing that performance, because that's the only time we as an audience know. But again, that kind of makes him an incredible jerk to be asking her for tickets while she's sobbing with a dead body on the same stage.
Like, here's what happened. At the memorial service, he was already interacting with her, and then she did get very nervous when she learned he was a police officer.
Yes.
So that was obvious, and I think that might have been a clue for him, but he was already sort of, I don't want to say hassling her, but he wasn't not hassling her.
He was telling her right off the bat, hi, yeah, I flew in from America, 11 hours, overnight flight. Like, he was already going into the kind of details that would drive somebody nuts while she's sobbing over her dead producer.
Right. So that's why I said that moment, because that scene ended with the Kirk deciding to do an autopsy after all. And Lillian overheard that. And that's when she started to panic. And then she also started to panic when she knew that Columbo was, in fact, not a reporter, but a police officer. But that's why I said that scene, because you're right. Like, why else would he have those interactions with her? But I do think truly you're really correct, is that when he knew was when they told identical stories. And it was just very odd, and he called it performance, and it was odd that he didn't even say they were telling the same story. It was like they were using the same words to tell the same stories.
No, it was exactly this. It basically, he didn't come out and say it, but he was saying you sounded like actors reading the same script.
Right.
Is really what he was saying. And that alone would be enough to have convinced him. And then I'm like, oh, then why was he being not cruel, but really unfeeling at the wake? And I can understand by the end of that scene, when she expressed such nervousness and everything, that okay, I get it. But I think that maybe they should have reversed this now, because they had to have the wake first, but there should have been something. Maybe he should have been a little more friendly, and then at the very end kind of suggest that maybe something more is going on when she got nervous about the police, instead of him just jumping right in with, oh yeah, I flew and blah blah blah.
But you know what, he did see her headshot in his office. All that really would establish would be that they have a close relationship. And that could also be a close professional relationship. Like nothing's really making it seem, it's not like he found love letters or the tickets to their symphony that they were going to go to. He didn't find any of that.
The affair never came up again because there technically, I guess, wasn't even an affair. All that happened was that we find out when the butler's blackmailing them that he also was the one that told Sir Roger that Nikki bought the tickets, and that's what made Sir Roger figure things out. So in a way, a lot of this, is partially because Tanner is in everybody's business, but not Columbo's.
No,
I don't know. I feel like I'm going to say he knew on opening night, at the opening night party, but that doesn't explain why he was such a jerk earlier on, and he was a jerk.
Yeah, and then why was he questioning them at the opening night party too? If he didn't suspect them, right? So he must have suspected them in some level. So why was he questioning them at the opening night party? I guess he heard Fenwick told them that they got into a fight.
Yeah. I think he had already known that Sir Roger's car had watermarks on it by then.
Did he?
So
yes,
he was already trying to think of. He was trying to think of where Roger was. He even said at one point, "If I could prove where Roger was, then I know what happened."
That's right.
So a lot of stuff that we have to interpret, and so I don't know. I don't feel as strong about this one as we have in many other episodes.
Yeah. Okay. But I agree. That's a good point. I think, by the end of the party, he knew when he made that little dig about their performance.
Well, by then the gig was absolutely up.
Yeah.
So now our segment is, will it hold up in court?
Tell me, Doctor, how do you catch a man like that?
You don't?
You're probably right.
I mean, it's tough because you have one man completely crumbling and falling apart mentally in front of an entire room just because a pearl fell out of an umbrella.
Right.
And you have Lillian saying he was out of his mind. He didn't mean to do it. Don't be so hard on him. All of which certainly sound like confessions enough. I mean, certainly the pearl is meaningless. I mean, even I could admit that they can't use the pearl in court.
They can't use the pearl. I mean, this is another confession, non-confession. It's like an acknowledgement. Like if we're real worlding this, no, this is not a confession because there's nothing signed. There's nothing acknowledged there. I'm sorry. There's an acknowledgement. There's not an explicit statement of confession. It's just sort of like, oh, my husband's losing it. He didn't mean to. And then also you planted that. And that's really the extent of what was said. Really, that's it. And that's the extent of the confession.
Yeah, it really is. Don't be too hard on him. He didn't mean to, which means that honestly, a good lawyer would probably get him put in a mental institution and she'd be free because she never said we killed Roger. I can't remember if she said it was an accident at that moment or not.
I don't remember if I don't think she ever said it was an accident. I could be wrong. And also no one acknowledged the butler.
The butler, it's like it never happened,
So I think like the butler, I don't know how they would prove that, but it didn't even come up at all. I don't think this would hold up in court. I don't think he would get, I think you can argue why he would have a mental breakdown because he's doing Macbeth and there's a lot of pressure and his producer did die and they're being accused of murder. So I think you can just say he had a breakdown because that's a lot of pressure on a guy. And he never acknowledged anything. Nikki never acknowledged anything. And then she spoke on his behalf, but really didn't say anything more damning than he didn't mean to. So I don't even know.
But he didn't mean to what? I mean, there's 2 dead bodies. So, if you say he didn't mean to.
But that's not like holding up in court, though. That's just... You know what I mean? True. That's just, he didn't mean to, I don't know, he didn't mean to flub the lines. He didn't mean to have a nervous breakdown. You can fill in the blank. You don't want to fill in the blank on a murder trial. So,
No, I really think what happens is I think he's gone for good. I don't think he comes back. I think he's cracked. I think he was slowly losing it the entire episode. Yeah. And I think he just mentally is gone. So I think he does wind up in a mental institution. Mm-hmm. I think she probably gets away with it, which, to be fair, the only thing she did was cover up a murder afterward. Cover up a manslaughter afterwards. Yes. And goad him into killing a blackmailer, but he's in no position to ever say it, and she didn't actually do the killing. So
Right.
I think she walks and he goes to a mental institution. That's my
So
guess.
I have a question. What do you think? You know, they were toying with the idea of self-defense. Actually, they weren't toying with the idea of self-defense. Nikki first said self-defense, and Lily said no one would ever believe that.
Right.
But I guess this really is manslaughter, because it wasn't truly self-defense, because Nikki was trying to prevent him from leaving.
He was not a threat. He was trying to leave the room. So there's no question.
Because to me, by him shoving her, I'm like, that did get physical. That could be seen as threatening, but he didn't stop that attack, which would be self-defense.
Yeah. If Sir Roger had shoved her and grabbed the necklace off her neck, and Nikki was in the room, saw it, and hit him on the back of the head to get him to stop and killed him, or shoved him and he hit his head on something and died, I think you could argue self-defense on that. But the fact that she was just sitting there in the box and the husband was there, even made a joke about it, because they were trying to fix this situation.
Right.
Once Sir Roger tried to leave that room, he was no longer a threat. He was only a threat to their career. And so really, with Nikki holding him and keeping him from escaping, that technically is kidnapping, because you're forcing him to stay in a room against his will, struggling with him, and then she killed him, now not on purpose, but it certainly wasn't self-defense. All Nikki had to do was let go, and Roger would have ran out of the room.
Right. So, and then she was yelling at him to stop. She did yell at Nikki to stop, but so this wasn't at all self-defense. I guess it really truly is manslaughter. Yeah.
She certainly didn't mean to kill. I mean, I feel it's as manslaughter as Robert Culp in Death Lends a Hand, that he certainly didn't mean to kill her, but she's dead.
Right. Right. And then they covered it up.
And they covered it all.
And then they had the extra murder, which wasn't great. That's a true murder. That was a premeditated murder involving a bike. Like, that's a whole lot. He's wearing gloves. That's a murder.
Yeah, no. That's a flat out murder. But again, he's in a mental institution. Nobody's going to prove that she had anything to do with the butler being murdered. So I feel she walks and he's in a loony bin. Now's the part where we rate the killer, or in this case, killers, on a sympathy scale from Ruth Gordon, our most sympathetic murderer, to Dick Van Dyke, our most vicious killer.
I have this dream, Francis. I'm working. There's a phone call, and he says, terribly sorry, but your wife's dead. And then I always wake up, and I want to cry, because you're still alive.
This is a little tricky for me, because, of course, we're talking about two different people right off the bat. We should probably do one for each, maybe.
Okay, so do you want to do collective, or do you want to do one for each?
All right, let's start off collective and then see where we go. So collective, and it's tough because it's also two deaths. So we have two killers, two deaths. I have a lot of sympathy for the first death, which is, again, a complete accident. He was being physical. He was threatening their careers and lives, not just for this show, but basically saying you'll never work again.
Right.
But they played a dangerous game where she was semi-seducing him to trick him into setting up this play, which, by the way, would have made him a lot of money. So he's still, I don't know why, if they had an earlier relationship, they didn't just say, hey, how about we have a play with Macbeth and you open up the theater once more. But
because who would want to work with them? They're annoying.
Maybe that's it. For that, I put them closer to Ruth Gordon. This was not an intentional murder. This was not premeditated. This was not meant to even happen. They weren't even supposed to have this argument. I imagine they had hoped that it would go on past opening night. The play would have been a smashing success, and then they could have all gone their separate ways. But it didn't happen that way, and he's dead. So we got to, so I'm sympathetic, but at least it wasn't premeditated. The murder of the butler, even though Nikki's the one that did the killing, I sympathize with him more because he didn't want to, although he ultimately did.
Yeah.
I sympathize with Lillian a little bit less because of what could this old man have asked for financially that they couldn't, as two world-famous actors about to become even more world-famous. He certainly wasn't going to tell on them. That would have ended any money that he could have gotten. So they certainly knew their secrets were safe. I mean, unless they were afraid that he'd find yet another master, and then.
I mean, that's always the risk with blackmail, right? That's the whole point, is that there is the threat of telling that secret to expose. And that's a good point with any blackmailer. If you do that, then you no longer get what you're looking to get, right? You're no longer getting your money. So I think the better argument there is the one that you had earlier, which is like, how long is this sham butlerhood going to last for them?
But I got the impression that he was going to be a butler for them for a couple of years at most, and then retire to his own little cabin. And,
like how long could this guy possibly live, really?
Right. That's what I think. So I would, for the first murder, I would put them relatively sympathetic, like in between Ruth Gordon and the halfway point. Maybe like only 25% away from Ruth Gordon.
Okay.
For the murder of the butler, I think they were both obviously guilty. He's more guilty because he did the murder.
Right.
But I think she's also as guilty because she's the one who really talked him into it.
Oh, yeah.
And he clearly did not want to do it.
Right.
But for that, I kind of put them collectively at 25% away from Dick Van Dyke. I put him on, past the halfway mark because they did not have to kill this old man.
So that's a tricky one because I don't think they're quite as ruthless for killing the butler as you do.
Right.
In the sense that they were being blackmailed. So it's just two versions of blackmail. They were being blackmailed or potentially exposed by two different victims in this episode. Right. So their back was against the wall both times.
Yeah.
With Sir Richard, it was a more of an imminent threat, and it would be much more catastrophic. It would completely destroy their careers. And like you said, that wasn't an intentional murder. With the butler, they were still being blackmailed. That would also be a career ender and jail time.
Right.
So that's a pretty big, that's like a heavy, heavy threat. That's not just a little I'm inconvenience and they killed for inconvenience sake or just to keep him quiet or he was a witness. It was nothing like that. Like he really was tightening the screws on them for sure. It's just that I still take your point that the guy's got to be 75.
Right.
So if he's got a diet of, blood sausage and all, know, like I don't know how much longer this guy's going to live. So, I mean, what are they going to have to really pay out to him?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if anything, they're going to pay for a better funeral than having him at a theater.
Right. That would be it. So
I guess, again, I mean, they had a good motive for the butler. They certainly had a better motive for the butler, but they still didn't have to do it. Because what could he really say? Gee, Lieutenant Columbo, these guys asked me about an umbrella. I mean, what did he really have? Even as a blackmailer,
he lied to the police already.
Yeah, he himself lied to the
butler
police.
Lied to the police already. So I guess what he could have exposed was the fact that, I guess the umbrella, that they did come looking for the umbrella. I guess the thing was is that Columbo outright asked, did anyone stop at the house before I got there? Asking also about an umbrella. And the butler said no. And then Columbo said, really, because it looks like their car was there. And he said lots of cars look that way. So he lied to the police and at that point knew that they were involved with Havisham's murder.
Right.
But I guess in terms of what could he expose, that was a pretty poignant question, but he doesn't really have any other proof. The whole thing is there's not a lot of proof to go around in this anyway.
And that's why the gotcha moment at the end was completely fabricated.
Right, because there was no gotcha.
Right.
So I guess I put them, it's another one where it's like, I don't love that they shouted the whole time. So just for me personally, I find them very unsympathetic. I was very happy they got their comeuppance. Even when he was reciting Macbeth at the end, I was just like, oh, enough already. He's still shouting. Come on. So, I'm a little torn on this one because pretty decent motive, or I shouldn't, an understandable motive, all very easily avoided because you don't have to do any of this really.
That's right.
From the start.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd put them a little closer to Dick Van Dyke, just because everyone likes that butler. And then to have him hang himself was pretty rough.
Yeah, that was a rough way to go. I mean, again, if they could kill Sir Roger with a cold cream bottle, they certainly could have done better than hanging him. I know they wanted to make it look like he killed his master and then panicked, but that's insane. He had absolutely no motive to kill Sir Roger. That made no sense at all. They tried to make it look like he stole the books himself out of the house, and that's why they had the bag of books.
He was going to have, that's exactly it. His motive was, I'm in a rare book ring, I guess. Maybe he's trading orchids with
right,
Jarvis
exactly.
in the States. I don't know, just high-end thievery. But yeah, that was the whole motive, which of course is preposterous because he has everything he needs. He's set up in a cottage on a beautiful estate, and he seems pretty happy to be a butler. So, and he even said that the master was very generous compared to other masters.
Yes, absolutely. Like he wouldn't have wronged him after 10. I think Columbo and the actors interrupted him more in the evening than Sir Roger ever did.
Right.
So with that in mind, I think all that's left to say is thank you for listening, and please join us next time when we
Rich, one more thing. I just have one more thing to add to Macbeth, also known as the Scottish play, also known as the Bard's play. So the setting for this episode was 2 actors performing in a production of Macbeth. And I don't know if you know this, but there's a superstition that this play is cursed.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So there's a superstition that this play is cursed, and certainly Nicholas went mad. Now, he did murder 2 people, but you could argue that might have contributed to it. But probably what happened is because he was in a production of Macbeth, and that's why he went crazy. It's a superstition that even saying the name Macbeth in a theater is going to cause bad luck.
Okay.
So thespians, really, if they're very superstitious, do not. They call it the play that is to not be named. They call it the Bard's play. They call it the Scottish play, but they will not call it Macbeth. There's reasons for the superstition. So what was rumored was that this play has been cursed from the very, very, very first performance, in which the actor who played Lady Macbeth died shortly before the first performance.
Oh, wow.
And Shakespeare had to get on stage to perform the part of Lady Macbeth. Shakespeare himself. So that's a bit of a rumor. Whether that's true or not is tricky to say.
Right.
But the reason why people think that this play, among all of his plays, why this one would be cursed is because, like you mentioned earlier, there are witches. And they say spells throughout this performance or throughout the play. And one thought is that these are real spells.
Okay.
And these real spells have cursed the play. And so I'm just going to tell you a few. There's this very famous production. It was the Laurence Olivier production of 1937, where, you know what? I have to say a whole lot of stuff went wrong. Okay, so in this production of Macbeth, Laurence Olivier himself almost died because a falling weight from the stage fell and narrowly missed him. Oof. Really right out of like a murder mystery, that alone.
Right.
The stage manager died on opening on the first dress rehearsal. The actress playing Lady Macbeth and the director were in a car accident that had to push back the production. And in that production, instead of using prop swords, they used real swords. And on accident, one of the swords went flying into the audience, scared an audience member who had a heart attack and died. So that's what didn't go great with that production of Macbeth. There's also...
Wait, I'm sorry. I just have to say, if you're going to use real swords instead of prop swords, I kind of feel like you're asking for trouble.
Don't you kind of feel like that's the best case scenario? Just someone had a heart attack watching it?
Yeah, I feel like that's a rough one to blame on 3 fictional witches.
Okay, so now let me ask you how you would evaluate this one.
Okay.
There's something, it's got the best name. It's called the Astor Place Riot. It took place in New York in the Astor Opera House.
Okay.
And what happened was there was a very famous British actor who was coming to the States to perform Macbeth in the Astor Opera House. There was also a very famous New York actor, and in protest of the English actors performing in an American theater, a riot broke out when he went on stage. It was so heavily policed because this rivalry, it started off as a friendly rivalry, and then the fans got involved, and it got very nasty between the two actors.
So even then, the fan base was terrible.
The fan base was terrible.
Okay.
And soldiers were called in, fired shots into the audience to calm the riot, and 20 people died at this performance of Macbeth.
Well, that also sounds like typical riot police procedure. Shoot the audience. Okay.
Shoot the audience, yeah. So, listen, whether you want to blame Macbeth or not, what you really do have to consider is that because it's such a popular play that is put on more than probably any other Shakespearean play, that there's more chance for things to go wrong than to go right, right? Because
well, that's true. Yeah, you don't hear a lot of problems with Twelfth Night.
Yeah, exactly, right? So there's just so much more of this happening that there's so much more chance for things to go wrong. So that's the origin of the Macbeth curse. I will say this. If you're ever in a theater production, Rich, and someone does say Macbeth in front of you, would you like to know how to counteract the curse?
I absolutely would.
Okay. You have to run outside immediately. You have to spin in a circle 3 times. You have to spit on the ground, quote a line from any other Shakespeare play, knock on the stage door, and wait to be invited back in.
I think I probably would take my chances with the curse.
It's a lot of effort.
That's kind of a lot.
It's a lot of effort, but that's really what happens with the curse of Macbeth. It's been rumored to have just all sorts of bad luck. There's so many more stories, but those were like the most famous ones. I think a riot's pretty intense.
I think a production that ends with 20 of your audience dying is probably, I mean, I would hope as bad as it would get. Yes.
I think so. But
wow.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled that we talked about this episode, that I don't have to watch it again. I have to say, I'm a little gentler on this episode on the second, third, fourth watch, because I got past the shouting. I grew up. I was like, just get over it. Just watch it. And then I did really like the episode.
Yeah.
I'm probably scorned from years of reading Shakespeare in high school, just every work. I mean, come on. Is that really relevant? Do I really need to read this?
I would have to say not. That sounds like it's a great way to make high school kids hate Shakespeare.
Congratulations, that's what happened.
Yes.
So I really don't like Shakespeare, but I have to say.
One more thing while we're on an anti-Shakespeare rant. One more thing. Now, this is something that I didn't mention in Etude in Black, but it's something that I feel is a little more relevant with this episode.
Okay.
Columbo was such a smash success. We heard last time about how they wanted to make another entire episode, and that was short fuse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this time around, when they started season 2, they, being the producers, wanted to make more money. So every episode of season 1 was 75 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes. They would add 15 minutes of commercials to make it a 90-minute episode, hour and a half TV, perfect, tight, everything's good. Well, they said, hey, how can we ruin the show and make more money at the same time? Let's make some episodes 2 hours. So the reason why Etude in Black was basically 1 hour and 38 minutes, so that they could then tack on 22 minutes of commercials instead of 15 minutes.
I see.
And this episode was also an hour and 38 minutes. So that's why there was just tremendous filler. I know it was only because you're talking about an additional 20 something minutes of an episode. That's not nothing when you have things that are normally plotted so carefully.
It absolutely throws the pacing off. It has to.
It does. And then in this case in particular, you have all this filler, it throws the pacing off, and then it ends like in an instant. It's like, hey, Four Golds and the Goblet episode's done. It's like, wow, couldn't you have just taken your time in other places or worked up to it? But with Etude in Black, they actually initially shot a 75-minute episode, and then they shot other scenes to bulk it up. And that's why the scene where Columbo goes to the maestro's house and just talks about how much things cost and then gets an autograph and leaves, but it didn't advance the plot because it just was an extra scene they needed to put in there.
Okay.
For this episode, they knew they wanted to have more time, so they shot it from the beginning with more time in mind, and that's why there was the sightseeing, him leaping out of the car, taking pictures for really no good reason, the joking date with the detective.
There were a lot of montages in this episode.
There was several montages, and so ultimately that's what happened. The time was bulked out. These are the only 2 of this season that were made to be 2-hour episodes. The rest, which if you look at the list of the other episodes, were all really great favorite episodes of ours because they still were these tight 75-minute episodes that with commercials were 90 minutes. But starting in season 3, you have a lot more of these 2-hour episodes. You have, and all of the new ones were just 2-hour episodes right off the bat. And they were the ones that really feel like it. If you watch him when, in the 80s and 90s episodes, they really, really filler and bulk out.
Yeah, well, I'll prepare myself. I'm glad to know that. I'll get some popcorn and get ready to sit down for a little bit longer for these episodes.
Yeah. It's a shame because you could really go back and just trim like you could easily have trimmed at least 10 to 15 minutes off of this episode of the show.
We could scale it back to one montage.
Yeah, that's true. I think one montage, yes, that would say, okay, you're in England, there's your one montage, we get it, we're done.
Yeah, like I didn't hate this episode, but what you're saying makes complete sense actually with both the episodes that you're bringing up because there is a lot of filler and you do feel it. And we talked about it with the Etude in Black episode where, when you're just sort of casually watching it, you don't really mind so much. This one, casually watching, I did mind. This one, I had more of an appreciation watching with the idea that I actually had to talk about it because I got to tell you, those first 30 minutes of those two shouting, normally I never sat through this episode. They did calm down after that, but the first solid 30 minutes of them shouting at every line off stage and on.
They really started off. I feel like they wanted to drive home, hey, here are a couple of really difficult actors who just didn't care. I mean, she's yelling at the director about relatively trivial things. Right. He's showing up late and then telling everybody to take an hour dinner break when they're all in makeup. The director's like, well, what do I do with these two?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at RumpledT, on Instagram at Rumpled Trenchcoat, all one word, on SoundCloud at Rumpled Trenchcoat, and on YouTube at Rumpled Trenchcoat, a Columbo podcast. But if you put in Rumpled Trenchcoat, it'll show up. Until next time, where we talk about Requiem for a Falling Star, which is another great episode.
I love this episode.
I just wanted to say that a rumpled in the hand is worth a trench coat in the bush.
Stop. Nikki, stop. Nikki, stop. That's what I'm going to say.
Tomorrow. Sets forth this rumpled trench coat. How about that?
Trench coat and trench coat and trench coat.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.